Welcome to Fix It for Josh's Sake. Today we're going to work on this 1973 Arctic Cat Lynx snowmobile. We're going to get it ready for the up-and-coming race season. Now I just pulled this snowmobile out from underneath of the maple tree in the backyard, so it's been resting there all summer. I'm going to have to do a bit of a deep clean on it. You can kind of get a feeling of, the leaves have fallen down on it. It's been unfortunately rained on a little bit. It's going to need a little polishing and shining and testing and tuning to make sure it's ready for the racetrack as soon as the snow flies. Now, the last time this snowmobile's been on the track was 2020. I raced the Andy England Fast 50. Did really good. Was very proud of how this sled handled the track. Had a really good time out there. Basically, because I put so much time and energy into getting it ready for that race, it was very rewarding to be able to finish, make it across the line, and see those checkered flags flying at the end. A lot can happen in 2 years, and it's pretty obvious that a lot of rust and crust and corrosion has set in here. So I'm going to have to scrub around on my clutch here, make sure that's moving good. I'm going to crack open my chain case here, make sure that's lubed up real good. I think I'm going to flush my brake system. This is how I decided to attach some juice brakes to my handlebar here. Did a Brembo system. Worked really nice. There's a couple other things I'm going to have to tackle here, so why don't you stick around with me as I go through this and fix it for Josh's sake. The skull right here really makes me smile. When I was cleaning this tank up, I did a full kind of clean out, and then I made sure the inside wasn't rusty. I even did a tank liner in here, one of those cans that are an epoxy, and I put it in there and sloshed it all around because the tank was a little rusty inside. And then I painted the outside, and my kids came out and they're like, "Dad, can we help you paint it?" And I'm like, "Sure, what do you want to do?" And my daughter was like, "I want to put a skull on your gas tank." So I let her have at it, and this is what we got. I absolutely love it because it makes me feel a little tougher and a little more of a badass when I'm on the track. So it's cool how children can kind of give you a little pep talk even when they're not right there with you on the sled. This seat here was kind of my first experience of learning how to sew vinyl, and it went really good. I was pretty happy about it. I actually took the stock seat and then I cut the back of it flat and then cut down the V here to give it kind of a, it kind of reminds me of a kitty cat kind of sled or kind of seat, maybe more of a race seat. But then my boot. Oh, when I was racing, my boot buckle, every time I'd come off the left turn, would grab and rip and shred. And so this right here got destroyed. That's one race, tore the stitches out and everything. That was one race of it getting tore up. So first thing I'm going to do here is pull this seat off and take that in by the sewing machine and see if I can't do a little patch up on this. Now that the seat's removed here from the back of the tunnel, I'm going to grab my pressure tester and we're going to go up here. I want to give myself a clean bill of health on this motor and make sure it's got good compression for this up and coming race season. Whenever you take a spark plug out, it's always nice to see how it's running. And this one, well, that, my friend, is a heck of a rich running motor. Definitely I'm going to lean that out a little bit for the coming race season. After you take that spark plug out and examine it, come on over to this compression tester and let's run a comparison of the thread size. This is going to be the adapter that I'll screw into the head of my motor up there, and then I'll be able to run a compression test on it with that. Okay. Got the pressure tester hose into the head. I've got the gauge right here. There's a bit of an art to this. Here's my carburetor, and so make sure that your choke is off. Make sure that your throttle is wide open. What we're trying to do is make sure that this motor breathes at its best. And then we're going to pull this over 7 times, and at that point we'll see what the reading is on this gauge. And that's how it's done. Now, according to the interwebs, 100 psi is still a healthy motor. In fact, you probably won't see problems until we get to about 90 psi. So I'm going to declare this motor healthy for one more season. I'm probably in my downtime going to start looking for a set of rings for this to make sure I can do a rebuild for next season. But I think we're good right now for this season. Moving on to some other good stuff to get it ready. Next, I want to come around here and look at the bottom of the carburetor. This line right here, it's pretty crusty and old right now, but that is the primer line that goes into the backside of the carburetor underneath here and allows for a rider to pump in fresh gas right into, right into the cylinder here and get this head getting all the gas that it needs to be able to start easily. Coming around to the other side, I'll show you why I'm worried about this. This last winter when my son was riding this sled, the primer bulb broke, leaked all over the place, and oh my god, it was probably 0 degrees that day. And so I just took a lighter, sealed that off, and my job while I'm getting this ready for racing is to put another primer pump back into this system so that my motor has gasoline right away. I hate pulling over my engine, cranking and cranking on the recoil here when the motor doesn't have gas going to it, because that's really hard on the rings on a 2-stroke motor like this. When you go to the hardware store, this brand usually hangs in like an Ace Hardware for a primer bulb. I know this is a shutoff valve. I won't buy the primer bulbs they sell at the hardware store anymore because there's not a long enough port sticking out on the side here, barb or whatever you want to call it, to put the hose on when it comes to the primer bulbs that they make in the same department these sit. And so the hose pops off. So what I would highly recommend is either a marine priming bulb, or I ordered this online and I'm pretty happy with it. I have a couple of these sitting in stock waiting for future primer additions to different snowmobiles. But there's also some other key success factors to putting in a primer bulb. Tygon gas line, make sure you're using that, because a lot of hardware stores sell water gas line and it is not the same, so make sure it's Tygon. And you're going to need a little line if you're using this type of pump for priming. And then I highly recommend getting yourself some carbon clips. Some people just call these wire hose connectors, but I think the technical term is Corbin clips. And I guess you could use, classic old pipe connectors, pipe clamps, but these do tend to leave a flat spot in there. And when it comes to a system that's on a snowmobile like this, where we have a pump down here that's trying to give us a pulse coming out of the crankcase down here, we definitely want to make sure this whole system is sealed up really tight. So that's why I like these Corbin clips. Some people will use these quick clips, and quick connect clips are okay, but because they're flat, they sometimes can ride just on the top of the ridges rather than down into the grooves. So again, I'm just telling you, I like these the most. You can go down to the hardware store and get all different sizes and set yourself up a little bit, but just make sure you're using clamps of some sort, because this has to be a vacuum tight sealed system to properly draw fuel from the gas line out of the gas tank and push it up into the carburetor. So the way this should all end up is, here's my primer, and I just fastened a piece of aluminum onto the steering frame of my bulkhead here. I got a line that comes after the shutoff valve here. So when I'm not running my snowmobile, I'm going to shut that off. I don't want extra gas possibly siphoning up or having any suction or whatever up into my crankcase. Sometimes that happens, and when these fill up with gas, they're really hard. When they flood up, they're really hard to start. So I put my priming bulb after my shutoff valve so that I can turn this on and then give it a pump here, and you can see the lines working. So first line comes up, there's a T in there, comes to the primer, The second line comes around, goes underneath, and goes to the bottom backside of the carburetor. Some of these Tilliton carbs actually will have a port up in here, but mine, on the other hand, has it down below back in here. Either way, it works pretty nice to be able to connect your fuel in line in like that, have a primer, and give your motor a real success chance of starting. Well, should we see how this primer works? Give it a pump or two. There we go. Give it a pull. Yay. Now that I know that motor is going to run good, I'm going to shift my attention under here. I want to check out this track a little bit, make sure all the cleats are healthy, make sure everything is lining up really good, so we're ready for the snow. Well, the good news, it's only one. See that wore out spot right there? That's this cleat is wore completely through, and you can see me kind of covering the gap. Well, the good news is it's only one. Bad news is I do need to pop these rivets and pull this cleat off and put a new one on, because that one has made it past its life. We're replacing that one before we head out to the racetrack this year. Once I know I got problems here, I'm going to dig in a little deeper. So what I do is I flip my sled over on the side like this. Got a board bracing it up. Everything else is sitting here. Gravity doing its work to hold it in place. And then I saw here that one of my carbides has came loose and kicked out of my track. So I'm going to be putting a new carbide in as well. That's a real easy fix. I've had real good luck with these Gold Digger carbide studs by Woody's. They look like that. Definitely going to be using some Loctite as we go ahead and zing a new one in there. So 3/8 inch deep well socket, and that's going to go ahead and give us some grab on that cleat. Okay, well, Flex and Flow, Learn and Grow. This is a 73 track. It's got the involuted track, and because of that, I realize I can't use these Woody's Gold Diggers in between the involuted section there. So I went with an ice pick, looks like that, and it's got a smaller diameter backing plate that fits nicely right in here where I need it to. So take that as a little note. If you are putting any studs on your vintage sled tracks that are involuted like this, you probably got to run a little bit smaller backing plate to get in between there. There you can kind of see the size difference. Back to the original reason why I flipped this snowmobile on its side like this is to get this cleat off. This cleat's got wear all the way through, and so I'm going to show you my little strategy on how I like to pop these off. My strategy looks like this. Little grinder with a cutting wheel, and I'm going to go ahead and cut the rivet heads right off of this cleat, and then I'll pry it right off. But I'm going to leave the skid in before I do anything else with this track, because it gives me a nice backing area here to press against. In fact, I might even pull this track down a little bit and press in against these slides. That way we have some good resistance and pressure. I have taken the skid out and then started working on the track, and that's a real pain in the ass because it kind of is slopping around, kicking around. So that's what I'm going to do. Leave the skid in, grind off the rivet heads, pop the cleat loose, then I'll take my skid out. And once I take the skid out, I have access to rivet the new fresh cleat in here. Well, there we go. Let's get something to pry that off with. Ha! There we go. Once you got that cleat off, go ahead and slide it right alongside where it was, but on the other side of the track, because we're going to use it as a backer to go ahead and punch all these rivets right out. Boom, boom, boom. It's a little harder when you don't have something backing quite as far up. So maybe I can pull this up here a little ways. Last one. Come on. Almost. There it is. All right. Getting it cleaned up. There's definitely a couple of things to consider here when you're looking for a replacement cleat. This is the stock cleat, and the first thing I'll point out is you can notice that the gauge on the stock cleat is a lot thicker than this replacement one. I got this at a swap meet somewhere. Somebody was pitching it as being, like a replica, or, new old stock is kind of how they phrased it. Just be careful, because obviously it's not new old stock. It is an entirely different setup, and I drilled this with a drill bit, and it sunk through really easily because this isn't even heat treated. This, on the other hand, the original Arctic Cats are heat treated very much to the point where they burn bits out very, very fast. So pay attention to what you're buying, and if you're getting new old stock, it's going to be a thicker gauge. And it's going to be a Rockwell hard, probably like a Rockwell 40 or something like that, hardened, heat-treated steel. The second thing to remember is that these 73 and newer Arctic Cat cleats are 11 1/4 inches long, so you need to know that. And then each hole punched through on these is every 3/4 of an inch. There's a hole punch. And the same in here, every 3/4 of an inch, the hole is punched. And that's what you need in order to, so in other words, it's 1.5 inches from here to here, 1.5 inches from here to here, and then 3/4 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 inch gap, 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch. If you have any other cleat that doesn't have that hole pattern, it's definitely a different brand cleat, not for Arctic Cat. So keep that in mind if you're replacing a cleat on your sled. For this next step, I need to pop these bolts loose. There's 4 of them, 2 on each side. So I like to get out my little paintbrush here and kind of sweep some of the crap off the running board here so that we can, have a nice working area here. So it takes a 9/16 inch ratchet on this side, a 9/16 inch ratchet on this side. And it's kind of a song and dance because you got to get one side loosened, but then come over and get this bolt to loosen. So that might mean you have to retighten this one to get this one to break loose. Like I said, it's a song and dance. You'll figure it out. With those 4 bolts pulled out, you can see the axle right here, and that's why it's tricky, because that spins in here. And so both of these bolts, one coming from each side, can spin this axle if it's not breaking loose and threading out easy. So when I put these back in, contrary to probably what other people think, I actually put grease in there to make sure these threads are always nice and loose. And then it locks really nice and tight against this aluminum, but allows it to thread out of the axle when we're done. So with all that done, we're in a good place. I'm going to go ahead and pull that skid up and out of there so that I can get my rivet gun in here and fix this cleat in there with a bunch of rivets and make that track back to like new. I know I keep comparing this process to a song and dance, but basically you got to get this skid propped enough to stay pressurized down here, but simultaneously not too far down in here so you can't pull the skid out of there. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm in a good place because these pivot points are now loose, and I'm going to be able to pull this right out and get in here and replace that cleat. A lot of guys have talked about how convenient a pneumatic rivet gun is. I'm finding out firsthand here that it is amazingly convenient. So I got a couple rivets. You can see my top rivet here, another one there to hold it. Got one in the middle down here in. Got those in, they go in real easy. And while I was at it, I figured, heck, might as well zing in another carbide stud because, hey, a little more traction doesn't hurt anyone. So I'm in that process right now. I'll show you how that looks. One thing I learned the hard way is that you got to keep this rivet gun upright. I tipped it over and did one of these rivets and oil spilled right out of this side port right here, just right out. So keep your rivet gun upright and you push it in nice and firm. Pull the trigger. Pop-a-rooney. And here comes the remainder of the rivet. Looking good. I'm enjoying this process. I got all the rivets in. When it comes to the holes in the track, I know there's a couple holes in the cleat that were punched, but there's no holes in the rubber belting in those areas. Those look pretty good. If I come around here, you can see all the nice rivet heads right there. This is a 3/16 inch rivet. It's a 1/2 inch long, and it's got to have a large flange. So make sure you get those details when you go down to Fastenal or McMaster Car or wherever to get your rivets. Oh yeah, final detail about cleats: buy steel rivets. Do not waste your time with aluminum rivets. They will tear right out. You have to have a steel rivet on your cleat. Well, it snowed last night, so I brought my skid into the house to do a little tune-up on it here. I want to point out some of the things that I think are pretty important here. First thing I checked was my track tension. I wanted to make sure that these two track tension bolts were equally pushing. And so I measured from here to here, and I was off. This side was an 1/8 inch looser than this side. So now I have that exact measurement equal so that these wheels are pushing equally on the track. The second thing I checked was the tension on this spring, which is controlled by this bolt right here. And I definitely had one a little tighter than the other, but essentially the way I test it is I want to be able to stand on this and bounce and have it go down just a little bit when I stand at. I'm 185 pounds. That seems to work pretty good for me. You don't want it too tight because obviously you don't have suspension, but you definitely don't want it loose. It's worse to have these bolts too loose than it is to have them too tight. And then the third thing is I was checking all my bearings, make sure that everything's rolling smooth and you don't have any grinding or gumping or catching in your wheels. So everything here is set up real nice. I feel good about it. I'm going to go ahead and bolt it on. Oh yeah, last thing is when it comes to this front swing arm, you want it a little bit looser than the back one. If you have to stand on this one to get it to go down, then it's going to launch every time you hit a bump, and it'll turn into a jump. So you actually want this one a little bit looser and more forgiving than your rear swing arm. So keep that in mind. The way I do it is when I put down all my upper body pressure on it, I want it to flex just a little bit. On this one, I want to stand my whole body on it and make it flex. Take that into consideration when you're setting up your skid before you bolt it in underneath of your tunnel. We're back out here at the sled. Got my skid leaning here. Just want to point out that when you get to the point where you're replacing cleats or checking your skid or anything, just look around underneath your tunnel. Check everything out under here. Make sure that rivets are tight, bolts are tight, everything is lined up and set up the way it needs to be, because once you bolt that skid back in and tighten that track, we don't look under here for another season. So just want to say, once you're opened up and exposed like this, check everything out and make sure it's good. Putting this skid in isn't a ton of strategy. It's just a matter of getting your track kind of positioned good so that these bolt holes right in here and here can fall into place and land right where those bolt holes are. And so, like I said, it's not terribly difficult. It's pretty doable. So the way it works is you start out by putting this wheel into the groove here, and the skid's going to be tipped up, and you come up here, you pull this forward, and then everything comes into place, and you can see it all hanging right here. Now we're to the point where I get to put the pivot axles in to these two holes, and then slide them up and find that hole and that hole. Now what I also need to do in order to make that line up good is I'm going to get myself a punch, and I'm going to slide the punch needs to be smaller than the bolt that goes into that pivot axle, and that helps me find it when I slide it in here and hold that into place, and then I can get the bolt in right after that. Since I don't plan on looking at these axles or those bolts until next winter when I'm getting ready for the snow again, I'm going to grease them up really good. Make sure those are all greased, and make sure the tips of these bolts are greased. I'm not worried about them coming out because I'm using a pretty hard grade 8 lock washer on each one of these so that they last and they hold. Since strategy is important, it's pretty easy to get this bolt into the front axle here when you look at the sled like this. What I do when I come to this second bolt here is get yourself some sort of a clamp or a strap or something like that to pull this axle back. It's only about 1/8 of an inch, but it helps a lot just to have this back pressure pulling back so that screw can drop in. And I mean, when you got everything lined up, they finger tighten in. So little trick there for helping you get yours into place. I know some of you think I might be nuts when I say that I finger tighten these, but what I do once I get an axle off, because, and you saw earlier in my video, I was talking about the song and dance of getting this side loose and then getting the other side loose and breaking them, you know, getting both bolts to come out evenly. Once I get the axle off, I run a tap in and a tap back out to make sure that everything's as smooth and clean as possible in there. And so that really helps me putting my skid back in. Got the skid bolted in, got a fresh cleat, couple fresh studs on. That's all in there. Bolts are tight there and there. Everything's looking good. Now we're moving on to the fun part, and that's the polishing and shining. And we got two strategies here. Got my Dremel here with a brass brush. Got another one over there with a stainless steel brush. And I got a helper here, which is awesome. This guy's getting excited for snow just like I am. So we're just going around hitting spots, and any spot where there's a little bit of rust or corrosion, we're just knocking it down a little bit. Put some WD-40 on it, that kind of thing, so that this is bright and shiny. Also had to get out the air compressor with the blower nozzle here because you know how much dust and dirt and leaves, mainly leaves, likes to get down in this chassis. But we're getting along real well. Things are starting to shine up, and I think we're going to be ready to say it's going to go real fast on the racetrack soon. I think I'm on the home stretch of this project. Right now I'm going to wipe this down with some all-purpose cleaner and paper towels here. And then I'm going to do a poor man's or a garage hack patch up on this corner of the seat so we can get it back on the sled. As I'm wiping this seat down, I'm noticing that some of my snaps are getting a little crusty. And so I'm going to have to, the way I'll go about it is I'll take a little knife like this and scratch off the rust and then put a little WD-40 or something on it to help keep that away. The other thing that I'm noticing is that some of these snaps on the inside are getting really crusty. And so to avoid the premature failure of these snaps on the inside, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to grab some of this grease that I have here, and I use a paintbrush and I'll dab it into the inner parts of these snaps to help keep moisture from building up in there and make them last a little bit longer. This is by far my worst snap. I'm actually noticing that it's starting to wear through the vinyl and kind of lose its grip there. So I am going to go find myself some shoe goo. I got a tube of that around here. I'm going to do a little bit of glue around this because I just need this to last. I can't have that ripping out. So here's the shoe goo that I've got. Got my gloves and a little bit of tape. And the reason why I got the tape is because what I'll do is I'll put a bead around here. And then I'm going to actually put a strip of tape over top of it just to help kind of like make it smooth. And I might even have to do that on the top side here too. Give a little goop around there and then run a strip over top of it so that it sits down smooth. That's what I've done lately. I think it kind of helps compress the glue in there and makes it last a little longer. All right, I wiped this down and cleaned it really good, scraped it back the best I can. And now we get in here and start putting some of this around the snap. If I was thinking like long term or something like that, where I could make this fancier, I'd probably stitch in a patch of vinyl. But right now, at this time of the season, I want to get this seat on the sled and I want to get it ready. So that's where I'm at right now. And so I put a nice little coat. You can see it's all the way around. And then I'm just going to put this on it. Mainly because I got work to do around here on this seat. And I don't want to be sticking that glue, to other parts of the seat. So I'm going to focus on this now. And I did think I was going to use this T-Rex Ferociously Strong tape. It's extra wide. But I do have this gaff tape. This is some pretty great stuff too. So I'm going to start with this because I need to kind of just get all these little tabs and things to lay down good. So this is a little more forgiving. I have worked with this stuff before, and let me tell you, where you put it is where it stays. So possibly if I get a good layer of gaff tape where everything starts to lay down smooth, I might come over top with this. We'll see. Let's see what happens here. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how the gaff tape's holding stuff together. I don't think that's enough though, so I am going to tear into this T-Rex and try to put a kind of a more presentable looking patch over this. So let's dig into that. Couple of things to keep in mind if you are doing a quick patch on a seat. This stuff, where you put it is where it stays. The other thing is that you kind of want to work from the bottom up, like shingling a house. You start at the bottom and then you lap and then you lap and then you lap. It does two things. It keeps moisture flowing down and away. It also keeps that sticky edge from catching on your pants or snowmobile suit or whatever. The third thing is I like to take a scissors and trim the edge round. It just looks a little nicer and a little bit more like you intended to patch that up rather than you were like, oh, I got some duct tape. Let's go ahead and slap that on there. I mean, we're kind of doing that, but we're trying to be a little bit more crafty about it. And that, my friends, is how I do a quick and easy patch on a seat. Layer it out like that. Try to roll everything. And in spots where you have to change directions on the tape, cut it and fold it over. And it kind of works. It'll kind of stay in there for a while. When you're racing, you always got a little maintenance and things to catch up on here and there. Maybe next winter I'll make a seat cover. Maybe next summer, actually. Here's that button I glued the shoe goo on to. Letting that dry. So we're going to walk away from this seat now. Let that cure out. I'll grease those buttons, WD-40 them, and then put it back on the sled when it's all dry and ready to go. I got the seat snapped back on here. And all those buttons along there are nice and tight, which is good. Last thing I need to work on here is I'm noticing when I'm pulling this strap that we're starting to get some dry rot in here. So I'm going to pop these loose, and I got some new ones here. These are Polaris hood fasteners, but they work really nice when you're racing because they help hold this hood down. Arctic Cat made a latch with a tensioner that fastened down inside of here. You can see the little slot right there. Those sometimes pop loose when you're racing, so I moved over to this Polaris strap, but in time these do dry rot. So I'm going to bolt on some new ones. Voila! There's the new one. Comes down and clips like that. Put the new one over here on this side too. Just clips down in like that, and that hood is not going anywhere. All right. Well, that wraps up this video of my process of getting this 1973 Arctic Cat Lynx ready for the 2024 race season. It's going to be fun to race with a bunch of other 292 Lynxes out there. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would give me a subscribe, a thumbs up, and a share, I would love that. Thanks for watching. Fix It for Josh's sake.